Welcome to the Deeper Thinking podcast. The electric vehicle revolution is no longer a Western-led phenomenon. It has become a defining chapter in China's ascent as a technological and industrial superpower. What was once an industry driven by Tesla's Silicon Valley innovation has evolved into a battle for global supremacy in transportation, energy, and supply chain control. At the center of this transformation is BYD, the Chinese automaker that has outmaneuvered Tesla, not just in production numbers, but in economic strategy, geopolitical influence, and mass market reach. This shift is more than just a commercial rivalry. It is a geopolitical reordering of industrial dominance, with implications reaching far beyond the auto industry. BYD's expansion is not limited to Chinese highways. It is part of a global strategy that mirrors China's broader Belt and Road Initiative. While Tesla and Western automakers concentrate on high-income markets, Chinese EV manufacturers are targeting emerging economies where affordability and infrastructure integration matter more than brand prestige. In Southeast Asia, countries like Thailand, Indonesia, and Vietnam are experiencing an EV boom, with Chinese automakers leading the charge by building factories and forging local partnerships, outpacing Western competitors who struggle with production costs and regulatory barriers. In Latin America, nations like Brazil and Mexico are rapidly adopting Chinese EVs, with BYD establishing an EV bus manufacturing plant in Brazil, positioning itself as a leader in sustainable public transport. In Africa, where Tesla remains non-existent, Chinese automakers are flooding cities with affordable electric taxis, buses, and delivery vehicles, offering a practical solution in regions where gasoline remains expensive and supply chains are fragile. Even in the oil-rich Middle East, countries like the UAE and Saudi Arabia are embracing EVs as part of their diversification strategies, with BYD's affordability allowing it to penetrate these markets faster than Western luxury brands. What makes China's approach particularly potent is that it doesn't just export vehicles, it exports the entire EV ecosystem. Charging infrastructure, battery supply chains, mining operations, and even financing models are all being embedded into these markets, making Chinese EVs the most viable option for governments and consumers alike. While China expands aggressively, the US and Europe find themselves playing defense. Instead of competing on price or production scale, Western governments have resorted to tariffs and trade barriers to protect domestic automakers. One of the biggest reasons China is pulling ahead is cost. While American and European automakers focus on high-end EVs, affordable options remain scarce. In the US, an average EV still costs over $50,000, far beyond what most middle-class families can afford. In contrast, BYD and other Chinese automakers offer EVs at a fraction of the price, making mass adoption far easier outside the West. The result? While China's EV adoption skyrockets, American consumers are stuck with gasoline cars due to the lack of low-cost alternatives. Western automakers are still largely dependent on China for batteries, which make up nearly 40% of an EV's cost. While the US is attempting to build domestic battery production, it remains years behind China, which already dominates lithium mining, refining, and battery manufacturing. Meanwhile, BYD produces its own batteries, controlling costs and ensuring uninterrupted supply chains. This level of vertical integration is something Western automakers have yet to achieve. While China has spent the past decade aggressively subsidizing EV production, battery research, and charging infrastructure, the US and EU have only recently begun serious efforts to catch up. Even now, much of the West's EV policy focuses on tax credits for consumers rather than massive industrial investments. In contrast, China's government battery megafactories, EV incentives, and infrastructure projects have created an unstoppable manufacturing machine capable of outproducing and underpricing Western competitors at scale. The deepening geopolitical tensions between China and the West are leading to a bifurcated global EV market. The world is increasingly dividing into two camps. In China and its partner nations, emerging markets in Asia, Latin America, and Africa are embracing low-cost Chinese-built EVs. These nations lack domestic automakers capable of mass-producing EVs, making Chinese imports the natural choice. China is investing heavily in charging infrastructure, battery recycling, and renewable energy, creating a self-sustaining EV ecosystem. In the US and Europe, these markets are shielding domestic automakers from Chinese competition through tariffs, trade barriers, and local incentives. Governments are pushing for domestic EV production, but costs remain high. The transition to EVs is slower as consumers lack affordable options. Battery supply chain dependence remains a vulnerability. This growing divide threatens to create two parallel EV industries where China dominates the developing world, while the US and Europe struggle to catch up in their own protected markets. Western automakers face a stark choice: adapt to China's cost-efficient, mass production model or risk being left behind. Some automakers like Volkswagen and BMW are already collaborating with Chinese partners to stay competitive. However, Ford, GM, and Stellantis are still playing defense, focusing on protecting domestic markets rather than innovating at the speed of their Chinese counterparts. The reality is that Western car makers cannot win by simply making expensive EVs for premium buyers. They need cheaper battery technology, greater manufacturing efficiency, more affordable mass-market models, and stronger supply chain independence from China. Without these changes, China's dominance in EVs will only grow stronger, while Western automakers struggle to remain relevant. What began as Tesla's revolution has now become China's revolution. BYD, NIO, XPeng, and other Chinese EV makers are no longer just challengers. They are global leaders, dictating the direction of the industry. As the West grapples with tariffs, supply chain vulnerabilities, and slow adoption, China is expanding, refining, and accelerating. The race is no longer about who can make the best EV for luxury buyers. It is about who can electrify the world first. In the coming decade, the biggest question is not whether China will dominate EVs. It already does. The real question is, can the West keep up, or will it be forced to follow? Tesla may have pioneered the EV revolution, but it is China that is driving it forward. The future of transportation is no longer being written in Silicon Valley. It is being shaped on the assembly lines of Shenzhen, Guangzhou, and Shanghai. And as the global auto industry transforms, one reality becomes clear. The next century of mobility belongs to whoever masters mass electrification, not just for the rich, but for everyone. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Deeper Thinking podcast, an audio essay read by me, Holly, your digital narrator. Until next time.